Okay, so today we're going to work on cloth objects, pillows, and that sort of thing. I jokingly called it fuzzy objects, though technically speaking, the fuzziness would come from the material, not from the modeling of the material. But the idea, nonetheless, is things that are made of cloth, things that have wrinkles in them, those kinds of objects, which are inherently much more difficult to model than normal rectilinear objects. And so there's a variety of strategies for how you can go about making these objects. I'm going to show you a couple strategies. Hopefully they'll kind of enlighten you into kind of how to work with these complex geometries. We will spend a lot more time as we go forward in the class dealing with not simple objects. So we'll move from this realm into topography, which is our first big foray in non-standard objects. But I think that's one of the best types of surfaces to really learn how surfaces work and how to work on surfaces. But in the meantime, we need to be able to create some pillows. We need to be able to work from that. I'll walk through kind of the base strategy for doing this. There's a very nice write-up on the Flying Architecture website that somebody did that goes through virtually the same kind of thing that I'm going to go through today, but I'll point that out just because it can be useful. They have tutorials here, and they have, where is it? It is Realistic 3D Pillow. And so he walks through kind of how he goes about modeling it, and we're going to do very much the same strategy for how it's done. I'm going to do a slightly different pillow, but the bulk of it is the same. And so he walks through kind of how he goes about doing it, and I'd recommend, if you're stuck or want to read through it. He also has a tutorial on how to render this with the fabric on it. He does some Photoshop post-processing that I'm not going to cover that makes the rendering look really, really good. I can't necessarily promise that yours will look the same as that, but therein lies the power of a little bit of Photoshop. But it is there, and so I like to at least point it out so that you have some background in that as well. So I have my I have Rhino open. I am in inches. I'm just confirming that I'm in inches, and I'm going to model primarily today in perspective, though I'm going to be switching into my front, top, and right side views a little bit more frequently than I normally do. But I'll start modeling in kind of the large window here so that we can work through it. I'm also going to start with just basically the rectangle tool, and we're going to do a bunch of work with just curves first, and then we'll ultimately create the surfaces. So instead of, and I can use this as an example, instead of creating a box to represent my pillow and then going through and trying to edit the box and make it not look so rectilinear, we're going to go about it a slightly different way in that we're going to create a series of lines and then ultimately make them into a surface. But we're going to do a lot of work with the lines first. So I'll start with the rectangle tool, and I'm going to start at point 0, 0. And I'm doing this on its own file because a pillow is the kind of thing where ultimately you're probably going to want to bring it in and use it elsewhere. If you're creating a pillow that's specific for your chair, that's kind of, it needs to start a certain size or it already starts with a certain shape, get that curve from your chair and then bring it in. You can just copy and paste it into a new Rhino file to kind of work with it and then bring it back. So anyway, I'm gonna do a pillow. We'll say that it's going to be 16 inches on a side, so I'll do at 16 inches, comma 16 inches, like that. 16 inches is by no means a magic number, just some arbitrary number that popped into my head, whatever. Okay. So I have this, and right now, if I were to select it, it shows up as a complete rectangle. I actually want individual curves, so I'm going to select my rectangle and I'm going to type explode. Or go up to, I think it's under Edit Explode. Yep, Edit Explode. And that gives me separate segments for each one of these lines. Okay. Now, because we're going to start to get into a little bit finer detail and want to be able to control this pillow, it's very unlikely that a pillow is going to have perfectly straight edges on it. So we need to soften those edges and give them a little bit of curvature. And so as we do something like that, we need to have some control points to be able to manipulate. And we've already played around with this where we have edit points, and we've played with those before. If I turn on my edit points, you see that I have a point at one end and a point at the other end. If you also turn points on or points off, you'll get the same results. The difference being, I'll show you a little bit later on, whether the points are on the lines themselves or whether they're off the lines as we start to manipulate them. Either option will still give you a point at either end. Okay? Well, this is by no means enough for us to be able to manipulate this curve and kind of tweak it. So I'm going to select the curve, and I'm going to use a command that's called rebuild. And so if I go to curves, I can come down here to, well, maybe it's under transform. Hold on a second here. I'm so used to typing rebuild that I don't know where this. It's under edit, rebuild. Okay. And so what this is going to do is it's going to bring up this rebuild curve dialog box. And so right now, the numbers in parentheses are what I have. So I have a curve that has a point count of 2, and it has a degree of 1. And so the degree means, is it a straight line? So a degree of 1 would indicate my line has 2 control points, 1, 2, and it's a straight line between them. No, that wasn't the straightest line in the world, but you get the idea. Okay? If I had a degree of 2, so this is points are equal to 2, degree is equal to 1. Okay? If I had points equal to 3, okay, and I had degree equal to 2, I have a straight line that connects the first 2 points and a straight line that connects the next 2 points. Okay? If I had a point, and they may make you have 4 points to do this, and a degree of 3, right? I'm going to have a smooth curve that's going to go through those points. Okay? And this works in 3-dimensional space, not just flat. Okay? So, when I rebuild this curve, we'll go ahead and rebuild it with 10 points. So I'll have a lot of points. And we're going to change the degree to be equal to 3. Okay? And so I'll go ahead and say, okay, now the checkbox for delete input is there because when it rebuilds the curve, it gives you a new curve. You don't want your old curve there anymore. So that's good. And so I'll go ahead and say, okay. And now, if I turn my points on, we see that I have a whole series of points, right? Same for this. There, right? So no matter which options I pick, I've got a whole series of points. Now I want to rebuild the rest of these pieces as well. So I'm going to select each of those, right? And I'm going to repeat the rebuild. And they're all going to be 10 and 3, and I'll say OK. And so now, if I were to select my objects, turn my edit points on, we see that I have a bunch of points that I can start to control and manipulate. Okay? So what I'll do is I'll switch from my perspective view into the top view, and I'm going to start to manipulate these curves a little bit. First thing that I want to do is I'm going to select the points at the end, and I'm going to drag them down a little bit. Now it's going to want to drag them either in one direction or the other direction unless I turn off ortho. Okay? And so I'll select these, I'll drag these a bit, and I'll make that have a slight rounded corner. Okay? Now I am making my selection by dragging over both because there's actually 2 points on top of each other, one for each line. I do want these points to stay connected. So when I have my edit points on, I want to make sure that I select both points, and then I can drag those points as well. If you feel more comfortable using the gumball tool, you can do that for this as well. And make sure these points are on. Select both of those, and I'll drag these down as well, like that. And we'll do the last ones here. Right? Now, because this is a pillow, and it's not a let's call it an organically shaped object. Because of that, I don't want to do any measurements. So this is not the kind of thing where I'm going to say, move this point a ½ inch, move this point. So it's a very arbitrary adjustment of these points. As I move any one of these points, right, it will adjust the rest of the points. So if I have that, go out, right, I can drag these. Right? And I'm starting to create a little bit of a wave on that side. Right? I can pull this side in, I could choose to move 3 points at a time, move all of these points in. Right? And so what I'm doing here is I'm effectively looking at the top of my pillow and trying to adjust what the sides look like. Right? And we'll move all 5 here for a second, in a little bit more. And then I'm going to deselect the first 2, and I'll move these in a little bit more. Like that. And then maybe we'll pop this one out just a little bit like this. And likewise, we'll move these around a little bit. And so what I end up with is I end up with a curve that used to be a square, right? But now it has a series of these little ripples on it. These ripples, however, only are in the flat plane. And in reality, what I really should do for this lecture is I should bring a pillow in so we can look at the pillow and examine the pillow. It's very unlikely that if we were to take a pillow and look at it from the side, right, that the midpoint of the pillow would be perfectly flat, right? It's going to have some variation too. So I'm going to switch, and I can do this in the top view or I can do it in the front view. A lot of times it's a little bit easier in the front and or right side view. All right, so we'll leave these both showing. I'm going to select my objects again, turn my points on, and now I'm going to start to manipulate these points in 3D space a little bit. And so again, there's not really a right or a wrong to how these work. But we're just going to adjust them a bit. And I probably should turn off my object snap because it keeps snapping incorrectly. So let me go ahead and just disable my object snap so that I'm not accidentally snapping things. And we'll see that I'm adjusting and manipulating this a bit. I'll switch into my right side view. I can make that big. And we'll make a few adjustments here to this as well. And again, there's not a right or a wrong to how this is done. If I look carefully here, we can see that you can kind of see that loop from the side. Right? And if we start to look at it in perspective, we can see that I have a little bit of undulation, right, working in the side views there. Okay, so now that that's done, right, it depends a little bit on the style of pillow that you want to create. And so I have this as kind of a basic idea of what a pillow is going to look like. I'm going to show you from here. I'm going to copy this and do 2 different styles of pillow just so you can see me make 2 different pillows. Okay, but we'll use this as the base. So I hit escape to get out of my points, and then I'm going to go ahead and just copy this and save it for later over there, and we'll work with this piece first. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll take this piece of the cushion, and I'm going to work in one of my side views, and I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to decide what I want my thickness to be. And so we'll say that this, let me turn on ortho again, this cushion maybe should be, I don't know, 3 inches thick, something like that. And so I'll set a second object that's up 3 inches. Okay? And so you can kind of see how this is going to turn out, such that if I went loft and I said okay, we can see that we're creating a little bit of a surface on the side. Okay? It's not quite there yet, but I just wanted to kind of show you where things are going. Okay? So we have this. So now what I need is I need something to work with in the center. And so depending on the style of your particular cushion, you could do a line in the center. The flying architecture example has a cushion that has a seam in the center like that. You could put, because this is a square pillow, you could put a little button in the center. Just depends on kind of what you're looking for. So we'll follow along kind of the way that they did it here in perspective. And let me go ahead and draw on the top view here. So I'm going to draw a little line. Something like this. And again, because it's not precise, right? Something like a pillow is not ever going to be precise. It's okay to just kind of guess at it. Okay, so I have this approximately in the center of my space here. I'm going to rebuild that curve. I don't need 10. Maybe let's do 4. maybe 5, something like that. And I'll go ahead and say, okay, I'll turn those control points on, and I'm going to start to make a few manipulations to these control points. We'll put this out like that. Maybe this goes like this. That one goes like that. Something like that. Okay, so I have those. Let me turn those control points on, and again look at them in the front view, and we'll make a few minor adjustments to them here. So a few minor adjustments there, and I have that piece. Once again, I'm going to copy this, and since I'm in the perspective view, I'll do it vertically, and I'll copy that 3 inches to get it to there. I accidentally... It's on the bottom right now. It's there. And so I want it to go up 3 inches. There it is. Okay, now I'd like for the top and the bottom not to quite be the same, because if they're the same, they're going to look like I copied the top and the bottom of the pillow, and pillows aren't like that. So I'm going to come back to my pieces here, and I'm going to start to manipulate them again. So let me go ahead and turn the points on. And I'm going to once again remanipulate these. Right? So let me jump into my top view. And we're going to start to adjust things a little bit here. And generally speaking, these are relatively minor adjustments. Some of which can be the same. Some of which probably need to change a bit. Okay, so I finished that. I'm going to manipulate the top here a little bit. So let me turn those edit points on as well. And let's adjust this. Something like that. Okay, and I'll look at this in the perspective view. I'll hit escape twice to get it out. Now, I'd like for these to actually be down just, it's not going to be quite level with the surface. I'd like to push them down a little bit. So let me move, and I'll type V for vertical because I'm in the perspective view. We'll go down, I don't know, let's do a ½ inch. Oops, should have been negative ½ inch. I could just drag these. It's just habit to actually type a value. Okay. So if we start to look at this, yeah. I dropped the center. Basically, I want the cushion to have a little dip in the center and a little dip on the other side. Okay, so I've done that, and I have a little dip there. And so what I'll do from this point is I'm going to come back, and generally I find it useful, depending on whether you use polyline or this control point. This curve, interpolate points, which is the second one under the complex curves, is the one that I tend to use a lot. So I'll just point that out. And what I'll do is I'm going to turn back on my object snap, and I'm going to snap a line, and I can turn off ortho here, on the bottom that's going to connect to this center point right there. And I'll do the same thing from this corner. It's this curve interpolate points, this one. You can do it not with the curve interpolate points. It just happens to be the one I kind of like to do this. And I'm going to draw each side, and that was a terrible curve. Let's try that one more time. That. The key being that I want to create, right, basically some curves that connect my center to each of my corners. Okay? And I'm going to do the same thing for the top. The top's a little bit trickier because we don't have a good, because it's floating in space, we don't have a good midpoint. So on this, I'm just going to do a straight line segment that connects from here to here, and I'll end up rebuilding the curve. I'm going to go right to there, right to there, there, and right to there. Okay? And so if I'm looking at these in perspective, we see that I have a little bit, right, of a line that's starting there. Right? Likewise, I have lines down below. I need to rebuild each of these. So let's do the top first, and we'll rebuild once again. And this time, let's go a few more. I want some more flexibility here. So we'll do 10 and 3, and I'll say OK. And then I'll turn my points on. We can see there's all my points. Right? And now I'm going to manipulate these, but I want to manipulate them in the up and down direction. Right? And I'd like it such that maybe I can take these 3, and this is kind of getting to the point where the gumball is really useful, because I want to be able to, I'm going to work with just these 2 for a second, and I'm going to select those and select these. I'm going to pull those up a little bit. And let me hold down Control and deselect, deselect. Move that up a little bit. Right, now I need to do a little bit more on each of these points. So, like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of the gumball in the world, but at the same time, it can be very useful. I'd actually like to have a little bit of a puff right there on the corner. So I'm going to raise these up a little bit extra so that I'm coming down on this. My cushion might end up being really lumpy if I don't move these around. So there's a lot of manipulating on these, and that's one of the important things to kind of learn in this process, is that you just have to keep tweaking. Now I want to make sure, that was an accident, I don't select these points because they have to stay right attached to this line. So we'll move just the end point there, and we'll have it kind of come into a little bit sharper into it. Something like that. Okay, so those are looking reasonable. I'll do the same thing for these back too. Turn my points on. Let's raise the bulk of these up. Unfortunately, I have to deselect this. Okay. Raise the bulk of these up. See, I'm doing that and that at the same time to save myself a little bit of work. And then we'll just manipulate a few of these down. Okay. So, I've worked to create that part of the cross section. Okay? Now, in reality, I would spend time and work on the bottom of this pillow. You guys don't have to watch me do the same thing on the bottom. Okay? So, the last pieces of it, though, is I need lines that go down on each of these corners. So let me go ahead and I'll draw a straight line that goes from here down to that point again. I might turn off knot because it might not be snapping correctly for me. And let me do a line from there to there. From there to there. Okay, so I will rebuild each of these. need quite so many. Do 5. Okay. Let me turn those control points on. And I need a little bit more manipulation here. And so sometimes the gumball is, again, a little bit good. Pull it out of plane slightly that way, out of plane slightly that way. Pull this one out that way a bit. Okay, so I've done all of those. So, once I get to this point, I have basically the control lines that are going to create this pillow. And it's going to take a while to get the manipulations right, but for the most part, I have them correct. So, in order to create surfaces, I'm going to use something that's called a curve network. And we'll get a lot more experience with the curve network. But in this basic stage, basically for a curve network, what we need is we need lines on all 4 edges of the curve network, and we can end up having them with some control lines in the middle. And I'll show you an example of this a little bit in a little bit. But what I can do is I can select this piece. Let me turn off gumball again. I can select this piece. I can select not that piece, this piece, and this piece. And so if we look at that, we can see that my control lines go all the way around this object. Okay, I can make a curve network out of that. So let me go up to Surface, and I'll go to Curve Network. And if I do it correctly on this Surface from Curve Network dialog box, I'll end up with an A, a B, a C, and a D going around my particular object. Okay, and if I say OK, it will then build me a complex surface. Let me switch into shaded mode here. It's not a mesh. It's actually a NURB surface. It looks like a mesh, but it's much smoother than a mesh. And it'll give me that kind of a complex geometry that starts to represent the wrinkles that are in a particular pillow, right? So once again, I could do it for the front. And so we'll pick this, 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 and this. And I'll go to Surface, Curve Network, and I'll say OK. And it'll build the front of that pillow. Okay, and so you can start to see, especially switch into rendered mode for a second, right? There's some pretty good little dips and tips that are in this particular pillow, right? And the pillows are going to look better the more practice you have at how to manipulate the points, but you get the idea here for how this is going to work. So let me go back to my shaded mode because I like to see the mesh, right? Now, there are times where you say, you know, I like what's happening, but I really want a little bit more control on this particular object. I could add another curve that goes, say, midpoint to midpoint. Let me rebuild. And that's fine. Let me turn those points on. And let me manipulate this one point to try to make the illustration here. Okay, so we'll call that the butt impression or something, right? And so I have this. Now when I do a curve network, I'm going to pick, just like I did before, I'm going to pick each of these edge curves that go around, but I'll also pick this one in the center. Okay, and I could add another curve that goes across this way, right? The key is when you start to have additional curves, if they cross, they have to cross on the same point. So you can't have one curve going this way and one curve going this way where there's a space in between. So if you're creating a network of curves, they have to match up at each intersection of curves. So generally, I do the borders and I do in one direction because it's easier to do it. Okay. So in this case, I have those. I'm going to go to Surface, Curve Network, and I'll say OK. And it will create one that has the little butt depression for me. Okay. Recognizing they're still meeting in that point in the center. Okay. Now when I do these sides, right, if I pick this side, and this side, right, I don't have a curve that goes across this direction. So I can still do the curve network, right? But I only get A, B, and C, not D. So I can say OK, and it will then pinch in on that one point, right? And so we'll continue here. To do the rest of these curve networks. There it is. Okay, so this is the one where the depression is, right? So it would make sense that the back end of this should be squished out a little bit. So you want to think, conceptually about when you're sitting on a pillow, what happens, right? So let me do one extra little curve here, and we'll go mid to mid, like mid. I'm going to rebuild this with 5. I'll turn my points on, and I'm going to work first with all 3, and we'll drag those out, and then I'll work with just a single one, and we'll drag that out a little bit further, right, to create a little bit of extra poof. Actually, let's exaggerate the poof a little bit more. So now when I do this curve network, we're going to take, it's easy to select the wrong curves too. So you want to be careful. And we'll do surface curve network. Okay. Right, and now if we look at that, because of this depression, this side sticks out a little bit more. So I'm trying to be smart about how I'm making it, and that's part of what's going to make a realistic, good-looking cushion, right? So let's continue on here, and we'll go there, and there, and there, and we'll do our surface curve network. And I'll say OK. Okay. So now I've made my way around the cushion. I should probably do underneath, but it doesn't really matter for the sake of what we're doing right now. Okay. Now, sometimes you want a little bit of extra little trim, or there's a little piece of piping or something that follows along. You guys have all done this already. If I create a little circle, right, and we do that little circle, I don't know, let's do a radius of, what should we do? I want a 1/4 inch is a little thick. Yeah, 1/8 is a little small. Yeah, let's do 3/16. See how that looks. Okay. Now I can do. That's too big. I don't like it. Thank you. I wanted 3/32. There we go. Now you guys have done this before, right? I'm going to move this. No, we'll do it. And I want to turn on my quadrants. Yeah, good. Stick this out a little bit. And I can do a sweep. Sweep 1. That's my rail. Right, and I can build in the piping that would go along the edges of these. Right. Likewise, I can rotate this, make the piping that goes around the outside. One of the tricks, though, is to make, instead of doing individual little segments, right, take this line and anywhere that, or probably better, I'll do the one that goes around here. Right, take these 4, and I'm doing this after I created the curved networks. And I'll join those together. Right, then we'll come back to this. Right, and we'll take this there, and we'll move this from its quadrant right to there. Now I have to rotate it, and so we'll do a rotate 3D. Oops. 3. And this is going to be in 2 operations. I'll do quadrant to quadrant here first to get it up into space. Then we'll do a regular rotate from this point so that it's a little bit more. We could look at it in the top view and you could see a little bit better the back corner there, so that it's kind of perpendicular to where I want it to be. Then we can do our sweep. Sweep 1. There's my rail. There's my cross section. Right? I probably have to trim that in. And say okay. But you can see that it basically built my little piping that goes around the edge of my, cushion or whatever. Okay, so when we get back here, they didn't meet up as nicely as I would. Part of that is because I have a pretty sharp corner here. So we're going to have to do a little trimming and a little fixing at that corner, but that's okay. So what we end up with is a reasonably good looking cushion. Okay, and if we do it just right, then we can hide the fact that that back corner doesn't really work. Right? And so we get it something like this. And if I give myself an infinite plane underneath it, and then we assign some materials. So let me go to my materials library. Let me load a material. And it would really be useful if I did a fabric material. So let's use a fabric material. I don't know. Let's do a leather. No, leather's okay. It's not the right. We need a fabric. I have no idea what this fabric looks like. Okay, it looks like tan fabric. That's good. So let me go ahead and apply this to a layer. It's my default layer because I didn't rename my layers at all. That means all of the objects are going to be applied to that. Now I do want to think about how the texture mapping is applied on each of these objects. So the natural reaction would be to select all of your objects and just do a box map. Okay? But in reality, if I look at each of these surfaces, I should map them individually because it's a separate piece of fabric that's kind of bunching. And so I'll go to my texture mapping and I'll apply a surface mapping, right, to this piece. That looks good. Let's switch into rendered mode so we can kind of see it. Okay. Let me go ahead and apply a surface mapping to that one. We'll apply a surface mapping to this one. We'll apply a surface mapping to this one. It's a little hard to see, but you can kind of see the fabric that's there. Right? Likewise, we'll apply a surface mapping to this. We'll apply a surface mapping to that. Okay, that works for me. We'll get in reasonably close, and we'll do a render. I don't want my infinite plane on that layer because we want it to be plain. And then we can do the rendering, and we can see what this is actually looking like. And it looks like I have some flipped materials. Yeah, for whatever reason, my two of those objects were less than ideal. And I guess this particular fabric, take another look, another render. And we end up with a reasonable looking cushion. Okay? So that's one strategy. It looks like maybe these were flipped the wrong way, and that has to do more with the material than anything else. Let's zoom in a little bit. Let's get a little closer view of it so we can kind of see how the material is applied here. And so we can see that that material is being applied. There's a little bit of a stitched seam there. You kind of get a better sense for how this works. Okay, so that's one method of creating a cushion, and the cushion turned out reasonably well. Okay, if we move over here, I said I'd work with the same piece. Okay, this time I'm going to work slightly differently, create a different style cushion. Let me turn off my infinite plane. What I'll do is I'll just, and this one's a little bit easier to do, I'm going to create a line that goes from here to here, and we'll create another line that goes from there to there. Okay? Now remember I said that this point became really important and that they had to cross. So before I move further, I'm going to split these objects. Oops, hold on, split. This. And this is where they may not actually cross just yet. So let me split this with this. Let's see if it can work. First split into two pieces. Okay, so that one split correctly. Let me split with this. And I end up with 4 individual pieces. That was important. Okay. Now what I'm going to do, and I'm only going to do the top half of this for right now. I'm going to look at these objects. I'm going to turn my points on, and so we see that we have a point that's at the center. I've selected those, and I'm going to move these points up to create one half of the pillow. Okay, and I know they're not quite ideal yet. They're straight line segments. Okay, but I'm doing this before I rebuild to make sure that those stay in exactly the same position. Okay, now I'm going to take these and I'll rebuild them, and we'll rebuild them with 10. No, let's do them with 5 because we've got half a line. And I'll go ahead and say OK, and then I'll turn on my control points. Okay, so let's work with first. Right, we're going to have to spend a little bit of time working on these. Okay, I'm going to move them up, and this is so that I can create the edge coming down, the taper, and then last we'll move these 4 a little bit higher, so hopefully they come down to the center. Maybe these need to adjust a little bit more. Oops. Something like that. Okay, so you see how I'm creating that side of the pillow? Makes sense so far? Okay, we need a little bit of variation. They can't all be perfectly identical, so we'll create a few little dents. These pillows tend not to be perfect. Right? If we want more dents, this is going to end up being a fairly smooth pillow. If I want more dents or more wrinkles, it's just a matter of rebuilding these curves with more points, and then I can work with them. Okay, so we have this half there, and so you can see how I would go about doing this. If I take these 3, 1, 2, 3, and I go to my surface curve network, okay, I can then build that part of it. Right, the material, because it's assigned by layer, is coming with it. Now, because this comes together at this little point, it'd be nice to have like a little button or something that goes on the end. So let's go ahead and build a little button. And so I'll start with just the circle. And I'm doing it, let's go back out of rendered mode. Let's actually go all the way back to wireframe mode so I can see this a little bit better. So there's that little circle, right? I can do the same sort of strategy for how I'm building this, but the faster way of doing it, because it's roughly an ellipse, is to use one of these ellipsoid shapes. And so we're going to do it by diameter, and I'll snap from quad to quad, and then quad to quad, and then if I'm looking in one of my side views, I'm going to have an easier time creating this for what this little button should look like. There it is. Now I need it to come through, so now would be the time to switch back into shaded mode. And if we're looking at this little button, I can't quite see it all yet, so let me go ahead and just pull it up until I can kind of see it all. I might have to do a little bit of adjustments. Tip it a little bit, push it back down. Tip it a little bit that way. Okay, so we get something like that. That's now been applied. If we switch to look at it in rendered mode, See that I have a nice little button that's been attached to it. In this instance, I can take my shape here and I can mirror it. This. Right, and theoretically I can get the lower half. Now, these didn't match up perfectly because the mirror, this line isn't correct. So in reality, I probably should take these, mirror these lines. Like that. And then I'm going to make sure that these actually attach point for point, which they do. There and there, because I didn't move those. Remember, I never moved those points to begin with. Okay, so then I can go back and I can recreate the bottom half of the pillow, and it's a surface curved network, and I can say okay. So you get the idea for how that would be created. Okay, different style pillow. It's doing the same thing. Depends on what you're after in terms of the pillows. The key is the extra little wrinkles. That's kind of the bread and butter of making pillows. So the one other thing you may end up wanting to make is like let's say we're doing a tablecloth or a drape or something like that. Same thing applies. Let me go ahead and I'll do a tablecloth for right now. Let's say that I had a table that had a diameter of 4 feet, something like that. I'm going to copy this. We're going to copy it vertically. What's the height of a table? Like 27 inches or something, isn't it? I don't know, maybe it's going to be a coffee table. Could be off. Alright, something like that. Now, one of the challenges here is right now this is a circle. And remember how the first thing we did was we exploded the square so that we had separate points? I need to be able to separate this out into separate segments as I go around it in order for the curve network to work. So I'll just draw a line that goes across in both places there, and we'll do a split of the two circles with these two, and that gives us separate pieces on either side. This and this, the top circle is roughly close because there shouldn't be too many wrinkles at the top, right? So I'm not going to do too much to the top. We'll leave it circular for now. The bottom I'm going to change, and actually before I do it, I'm also going to make another copy, and I'm going to copy it vertically a bit of the ways up. Okay? Now I'll rebuild, and we can rebuild all of these at once, and we'll rebuild. We'll say with 15. You can preview it, but you can't really see it until you turn your points on. So there's my points. Okay, and now what I'll do is I'll start to transform. Oops, that. Turn my points on. I'll start to transform these points. So we'll do subtle, right? This is going to be a little bit more wavy of the tablecloth. If I wanted it to be not, this will still be relatively tight. If I want it to go in and out a lot, right, I'm going to have to rebuild this with a lot more segments. Maybe I'll do it on the back side. So we'll do a few little transformations here. Right. I'll work with the upper section, make a few more transformations. I should probably pay some attention to what's going on at the bottom if I wanted this to look right. Anyway, so I make those adjustments. I need a curve that goes down the side there because remember I have to keep that midpoint connected. Do the same thing here to there. And now I can do my curve network, and it's going to be this curve, this curve, this curve, and this curve, and this curve. Okay, and I'll end up with something that has a little bit of a wave to it, right? for this. If I wanted it to be more of a traditional tablecloth, what I end up needing to do is I rebuild, and instead of doing it with 15, I really need to do it with about 50. And if I turn those points on, you can see how tight they are. Okay? Now, in this instance, I'm going to switch into the top view, and I'm going to turn off gumball because I don't want to be restricted in my direction. And I'm just going to move my way. Remember, that point has to stay stationary. So we'll move this point. Hold on. I have to turn off object snap. Make it big. Again, sorry, you kind of have to bear with me while I do this. That's what we're kind of going for. So again, sorry this is taking so long.
There's a lot of points.
But this is you know in order to have it look accurate, you need a density of points to make something like this. So you just have to kind of stick with it. Just kind of stick with it, and you'll get there. I think my zigzags are getting further apart when I'm getting to the end, but that's okay. Okay, so we go like this, and I'm back to, right, this is an object, oh, how fun, right? So this was back when I had those snaps on, so we need to make an adjustment with this point. So let me look at it in the side view. Yeah, it did. So we're just going to try to drop that back down. Now that being said, right, I could, and I'm not going to make you watch me do this, but I could spend a little bit more time and adjust the vertical of this a little bit to create a little bit of wave at the bottom too. But for right now, we don't need to watch that. Okay. So I'll pick this point and this point, this and this. The line here. Or the line in the middle. I deleted it because I didn't want to have to deal. You didn't have to watch me, right? So it would be a good idea to do the line in the middle because you can vary and cause it to sway a little bit. It's going to add to the realism. But if I go to Surface Curve Network now, and I say OK, right? You're going to end up with a tablecloth that drapes that has, right, a little bit more pinching to it, right? Now, if I had one in the middle, it would be that much more accurate, right? The other things that you may end up doing is you may have a little bit, and this is one of the challenges when you start to get into drapes, is you have the tablecloth curves over the edge or something like that, so you have to deal with the top edge a little bit too, and there are tricks for that. But for right now, I don't want to overload you too bad, but this is how you would start to go about creating these kinds of objects, okay? So when you play with the materials, that's where you can get into some of the fuzziness. So the materials that are in the materials library right now, I think it's even going to load my materials. Oh, okay. I don't know if there's any that are really that fuzzy, but if there aren't, we should probably get some. The leathers actually look pretty good. We'll load that one in. Yeah, I'm not seeing one that's particularly fuzzy. I can work on one for you. But so let's say I wanted this to be leather instead. Let's take these and that, and let's apply. And so in this sense, I need to do a little bit more with my texture. Oh, you guys can't see it anymore. But it looks like leather. It looks like leather.
We're starting to see a little texture.
A little bit right there. Anyway, so I could pick a different one. The point is, play around with the fabrics, and you can build something like this. Okay. The key is just kind of analyzing how fabrics work in real life, right? If you look at the chair you're sitting on right now, there's not very many wrinkles that are going to happen, except for right at the corners, right? There's a few little bunches of the fabric. Those would be what you'd be trying to model if you were modeling a chair like this. If it's a more of a natural fabric throw chair type thing with wrinkles and butt dimples and that sort of thing, you're going to go about creating it much more like this. Okay. So play around with it today. What I'm asking you to do for your exercise 210 is to create some kind of a quote fuzzy object or a pillow type object. Drapes, tablecloths, any of that kind of stuff is perfectly fine. The point is it should be a fabric, not rectilinear object. You'll do the same thing that you did last class in terms of posting it as a block that somebody else could use down the road. So you'll do the same basic ending steps. That's what the whole last part is about. I did adapt this handout from the one from last time, so at some point in here it might relate to your building component or something like that. I still mean your pillow, right? I know it's not really a building component. I tried to edit that out, but it may say that somewhere. So, are there any questions about this before I turn you loose?
We can work on the pillows for our...
Absolutely. So a lot of times you guys are going to want pillows for your table and chairs, which are due on Wednesday. By all means, use those pillows. Make those pillows. Those are the ones you're going to use. Again, today's is about skill building, not necessarily what the final output looks like. So I want you to play around with this. I would just encourage you to if your table and chairs need a pillow, do that pillow, if that makes sense. Okay? So you won't be penalized for working on your assignment 201 either. Remember that 201 is due before class on Wednesday, right? You want to make sure you post it before class. You guys have yet to get a grade sheet yet. As soon as you turn in the first assignment, I'll grade it and give you back the grade sheet, and you can check on how you're doing with your exercises and that sort of thing. Okay? Good. So, I'll turn you loose.
Is that our end?